On October 5, 1944, somewhere over Asselt in the Netherlands, 5 pilots of the Royal Canadian Air Force's No. 401 Squadron were patrolling at high altitude. Their Spitfire Mark 9 aircraft glinted under the afternoon sun as they held formation, scanning the skies for any sign of enemy activity. Squadron leader Smith was the first to notice an anomaly, a silvery object streaking downward near Nîmes at a speed that defied conventional aircraft performance. There was no propeller, no recognizable fighter silhouette, only a metallic dart moving at velocities the Canadians had never encountered in combat. The aircraft was a Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Its twin turbojet engines left thin trails of exhaust across the violet-tinged sky. For years, Allied intelligence had speculated about German jet programs, but until that instant, reports had remained unverified rumors. Now, the reality of a supersonic threat was undeniable. Smith immediately directed Flight Lieutenant Davenport, Flight Lieutenant Everard, Flying Officer Mai, and Flying Officer Sinclair into attack positions, coordinating their approach over the radio. What unfolded next became a landmark event in aviation history. The Me 262 was officially the first jet fighter to be downed by gunfire in aerial combat. Beyond the tactical achievement, the incident exposed a critical weakness in what German propaganda had heralded as an invincible weapon. The Schwalbe revealed that its cutting-edge speed came with a hidden fragility. Within a few months, American P-51 Mustang units would capitalize on this vulnerability, organizing targeted operations that rendered the Me 262 far less threatening despite its revolutionary design. The psychological effect of this initial encounter reverberated across Allied fighter units throughout Europe. Witnesses immediately grasped that the rules of air warfare had shifted. Captain Chuck Yeager of the 357th Fighter Group, stationed at RAF Lyon, absorbed the intelligence briefings with growing unease. The Me 262 could reach 540 mph in level flight, far exceeding the P-51 Mustang's top speed of 437 mph. In a straight pursuit, the jet was effectively untouchable. The implications were stark. If Germany deployed these aircraft in significant numbers with experienced pilots and sufficient fuel, Allied strategic bombing missions could face catastrophic losses. B-17 flying fortresses lumbering through flak-filled skies at around 180 mph would be highly vulnerable, as jets could strike from virtually any direction and disengage before escort fighters could respond. Yet, the Me 262 was far from invincible. Its revolutionary engines, the Junkers Jumo 4 axial flow turbojets, marked a significant leap in aviation technology, but came with severe limitations. Each engine generated approximately 1,980 pounds of thrust at 8,700 revolutions per minute, burning J2 synthetic fuel derived from lignite at roughly twice the consumption of conventional piston-engine fighters. The turbines, crafted from chromodur alloys due to shortages of heat-resistant nickel and chromium, experienced rapid thermal creep under combat stress. In practice, these engines required major maintenance after just 10 flight hours, with complete replacement typically necessary after about 25 hours, limiting operational readiness. Another critical issue was throttle responsiveness. Unlike traditional piston engines, the Jumo 4 could not adjust instantly to changes in power settings. Rapidly advancing the throttle risked flooding the combustion chambers with fuel before sufficient airflow could balance the mixture, causing extreme temperatures in the exhaust and overheating the turbine blades. This made maneuvering in combat particularly hazardous, as aggressive throttle adjustments could destroy an engine mid-flight. In short, the Me 262 represented both the promise and the peril of early jet technology. Its speed and firepower redefined aerial combat, but its mechanical fragility and logistical demands imposed strict limits on its effectiveness. The encounter over Asselt foreshadowed the tactical evolution of Allied fighter strategy, highlighting that even the most advanced aircraft could be countered with careful planning and disciplined execution. Pilots operating the 262 faced a persistent challenge in managing the aircraft's engines, which demanded extremely careful handling. Throttle inputs had to be applied gradually, with pilots waiting for the jet turbines to respond before making further adjustments. In high-pressure combat situations where split-second decisions could determine survival, this sluggish engine behavior severely limited the aircraft's responsiveness. Consequently, the 262, despite being one of the fastest fighters of its time, became strikingly vulnerable at critical moments, particularly during takeoff and landing sequences. The aircraft's high wing loading, approximately 294 kilograms per square meter, was far above that of any conventional piston-engine fighter of the era. This design characteristic meant the 262 required takeoff speeds well over 110 miles per hour, and landings demanded similar velocities. The initial acceleration phase after brake release was especially perilous. The jet could take close to half a minute to reach sufficient flying speed. During this interval, the aircraft was effectively constrained to a straight trajectory, unable to maneuver or accelerate rapidly. Any enemy fighter intercepting the 262 during these 30 seconds encountered a nearly immobile target, highly exposed and defenseless. Landing exposed the aircraft to similar hazards. After missions lasting between 60 and 90 minutes, jet pilots often returned with fuel reserves running low. Approaching airfields, they had to reduce speed to safely extend landing gear and deploy flaps, creating predictable flight paths for enemy attackers. At low speeds, the advanced engines that provided formidable high-altitude performance became a liability, anchoring the aircraft rather than empowering it. Intelligence analysts from the 8th Air Force in England scrutinized these vulnerabilities in detail throughout the latter part of 1944. Reconnaissance flights identified major 262 air bases at locations such as Armagh, Heppe, Rhina, Lechfeld, and Munich Re. Additionally, gun camera footage from rare encounters with jet aircraft revealed both the tactical advantages at high speed and the severe limitations at low speed. Allied planners recognized that 262 pilots, having consumed most of their fuel during rapid interceptions, were essentially required to return to these known bases. Alternative airfields were not viable, as the specialized J-2 fuel necessary for jet engines was only stocked at select facilities. This geographic constraint presented a tactical opportunity. If propeller-driven fighters such as the P-51 Mustang could loiter near jet airfields, they could engage the 262 during its most exposed moments, takeoff and landing. Such operations demanded patience, extended fuel endurance, and the courage to enter heavily defended German airspace. Nonetheless, this strategy offered the only reliable means for conventional fighters to contend with jets on anything approaching equal terms. German commanders quickly recognized these vulnerabilities and implemented extensive defensive measures. Anti-aircraft installations were concentrated along approach corridors, employing 88mm cannons, 37mm automatic guns, and quadruple 20mm systems to create dense flak zones. Advanced piston fighters, including the Focke-Wulf 190D long nose and the Rear Te-152H, provided top cover for jet operations during takeoff and landing. Flight schedules were deliberately randomized to obscure patterns, while some bases even deployed decoy aircraft to lure attacking forces into flak fields. In several cases, auxiliary buildings near airfields were converted into emergency runways with hidden parking areas, allowing jets to operate from unexpected locations. Despite these layered defenses, the underlying problem remained intractable. Jets had to leave and return to the ground. During these phases, no level of protection could fully mitigate the aircraft's vulnerability. This reality was evident to pilots such as Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group, who became intimately acquainted with 262 operations over Germany in October 1944. Drew, then 21 years old, had previously encountered a jet and produced detailed reports on its capabilities. On October 7th, he found himself grounded and facing disciplinary scrutiny after carrying out an unauthorized victory roll on a prior mission, highlighting the high-risk nature of engagement with these advanced aircraft. In summary, while the 262 excelled at high-speed interception and altitude performance, its slow throttle response and extreme wing loading rendered it dangerously exposed during takeoff and landing. Allied intelligence recognized these patterns and adapted strategies to exploit them, demonstrating that even revolutionary technology had inherent operational limits. The disciplinary action against Drew was effectively suspended when intelligence reports indicated a concentration of 262 jet fighters stationed at Akma Arad airfield in northwestern Germany. Due to his prior experience engaging enemy jets, he was selected to lead a fighter sweep over the base. In preparation, Drew meticulously briefed his squadron, stressing the necessity of surprise, assertiveness, and the willingness to face intense anti-aircraft fire to achieve mission success. Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless was assigned as his wingman and was committed to staying alongside Drew regardless of the circumstances. Drew's aircraft, the P-51 Mustang designated E-2D and nicknamed Detroit Miss, departed RAF Little Walden with full internal and auxiliary wing fuel tanks, granting nearly 4 hours of operational endurance. The October afternoon over Germany offered scattered cloud cover and clear visibility, ideal for detecting enemy aircraft against the landscape below. At 15,000 feet, Drew guided his formation toward the known location of the jet base, constantly scanning for the distinctive vapor trails or reflective glints of polished aluminum indicative of the 262 seconds. As they approached the airfield, 2 jets were observed on the runway, engines already running and preparing to take off. Drew immediately pushed his throttle to maximum and initiated a steep dive, rapidly increasing speed while descending toward the enemy aircraft. The lead 262, piloted by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, had barely begun its takeoff when Drew opened fire from a distance of 800 yards. His 50 caliber machine guns traced lines along the runway and struck the jet's right engine, causing catastrophic failure. Despite being airborne, Arnold's aircraft could not sustain flight on one engine and, after Drew close to 400 yards for a follow-up attack targeting the cockpit, rolled inverted and crashed into trees beside the runway. The second 262, under Lieutenant Guard Cobbett, witnessed the destruction of Arnold's plane and attempted to abort takeoff. However, the jet's sluggish throttle response and high takeoff speed prevented rapid deceleration. Drew promptly realigned for a second attack pass, despite warnings from McCandless about anti-aircraft fire. German gunners engaged, sending 88mm shells into the sky around the Mustangs, erupting in black puffs of shrapnel. Ignoring the danger, Drew executed a precise dive and fired a sustained burst into Cobbett's aircraft, striking both engines and fuselage. The jet was engulfed in flames, leaving Cobbett to escape while the aircraft was completely destroyed. In under 2 minutes, Drew had eliminated 2 of Germany's most advanced fighter jets, demonstrating that technological superiority alone offered no protection during vulnerable flight phases. His actions underscored how aggressive tactics, combined with precise timing, could neutralize even the most advanced jet threat. Unfortunately, Drew's gun camera malfunctioned during the engagement, leaving no visual record of his success. McCandless, the sole witness, was hit by flak while covering their retreat and was shot down, ultimately becoming a prisoner of war before he could validate Drew's claims. Consequently, 8th Air Force Headquarters initially denied any credit for the victories, delivering a severe professional disappointment despite the historical significance of the mission. Recognition finally arrived nearly 4 decades later in 1983, after cross-referencing German Luftwaffe archives with American records. Luftwaffe Ace Georg Peter Ed, who had been scheduled to lead the 262 formation that day but was grounded due to mechanical issues, confirmed witnessing a yellow-nosed P-51 attacking and destroying both jets. Although Ed could not discern the Mustang's name from his vantage point, his testimony was sufficient to substantiate Drew's accomplishments. On May 12, 1983, the United States Air Force awarded Drew the Air Force Cross in acknowledgement of his extraordinary combat achievement. The Secretary of the Air Force formally honored Vernon Drew and his wife, who had been transported from Johannesburg, South Africa, to the ceremony aboard a C-141 Starlifter. Drew holds a unique distinction. He's the only Allied pilot in history to have downed 2 jet-powered aircraft during a single sortie while flying a propeller-driven fighter. On the same day, October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemper of the 479th Fighter Group may have engaged in 262, although the outcome remains uncertain. CMP, one of the most seasoned leaders within the 8th Air Force's fighter ranks, reported an attack on what he identified as a 109 over German territory. Analysis of his gun camera footage, however, proved inconclusive. The aircraft could have been either a Messerschmitt 109 or the new Me-262 jet. Later post-war evaluations leaned toward the possibility that CMP had indeed targeted a jet, but the claim was never officially verified. What this incident highlighted, beyond individual victory tallies, was a developing pattern in air combat strategy. American pilots were gradually discovering that the 262, despite its groundbreaking speed, was not invincible. Success against these jets depended on avoiding direct confrontation in their element high-speed, high-altitude flight, and instead exploiting moments when the jets were vulnerable, such as during takeoff, landing, or other low-speed maneuvers. Exactly 1 month later, on November 6, 1944, Chuck Yeager encountered his first 262 while leading a bomber escort near Acme, Germany. Flying his P-51 Mustang, Glamorous Glen III, named after his wife Glenys, Yeager was maintaining patrol altitude when he spotted a group of jets attempting to intercept the bomber formation. True to their tactical doctrine, the 262 seconds dived through the bombers at incredible speed, unleashed brief bursts of fire, and used their momentum to climb back to altitude before any escort fighters could respond. Although conventional wisdom dictated that pursuing these jets was futile, Yeager made a calculated decision. He reasoned that the aircraft had limited fuel and would eventually need to land. Breaking away from the formation, he descended through the clouds and soon spotted a single 262 in the landing pattern near Acme Airfield. The jet had extended flaps and landing gear, flying at a reduced speed of approximately 150 mph on final approach. Focused on landing, the German pilot apparently did not notice the Mustang closing from above and behind. Yeager throttled up and executed a steep dive, allowing gravity to accelerate the P-51 to speeds exceeding 450 mph. At a distance of roughly 400 yards, he opened fire, carefully placing his tracers along the jet's wings and fuselage. The initial burst seemed to incapacitate the enemy pilot, and the 262 failed to maneuver evasively. Yeager pressed the attack at close range, delivering sustained fire into the engines and cockpit. The jet's left wing broke upward, sending the aircraft into an inverted spin before it crashed into the forest just short of the runway, erupting in flames. There was no time for celebration. The airfield's anti-aircraft defenses immediately responded, sending 88mm shells and tracer rounds into the air around the Mustang. Yeager skillfully navigated at treetop level along the runway, using sheer speed to evade the flak. Some rounds fired in confusion even struck positions across the field. Once clear of the immediate danger, he pulled up into a valley, finally out of range. This daring engagement demonstrated that, despite their speed advantage, 262 jets were not beyond the reach of well-executed tactics. Reflecting on the event with his characteristic modesty, Yeager later commented simply, "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down." Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell? During the final months of 1944 and into early 1945, American fighter units systematically refined their methods for countering the emerging threat of German jet aircraft. These tactics were not improvised. They resulted from painstaking evaluation of combat experience and meticulous study of gun camera footage. Among the available Allied fighters, the P-51 Mustang emerged as particularly well-suited for confronting jets, largely due to its combination of extended range and endurance. Equipped with full internal fuel tanks and 2 additional wing-mounted drop tanks, a Mustang could remain airborne for over 7 hours, allowing pilots to patrol or loiter near jet airfields for extended periods without returning to base. When enemy jets were sighted, Mustang pilots relied on altitude advantage, initiating steep dives to convert height into speed. In these dives, the P-51 could momentarily reach or surpass 500 mph, a velocity sufficient to overtake the Me-262 seconds during vulnerable phases such as takeoff and landing approaches. Success depended on precise timing. Intercepting jets during their takeoff role required early detection and careful positioning, while attacks on landing aircraft demanded patience, waiting until the jets were fully committed with landing gear and flaps deployed. Through persistent observation and intelligence collection, American pilots developed a detailed understanding of Me-262 operational patterns. They noted that these jets usually conducted missions during morning and late afternoon periods when sunlight offered good visibility, but also created visual challenges for defenders. Me-262 often flew in pairs or small formations rather than alone, meaning that striking one aircraft frequently provided openings to engage additional targets. Additionally, the constraints imposed by fuel limitations prevented German pilots from aborting a landing and circling for another attempt. Once a Me-262 was committed to a low-fuel landing, the pilot was forced to continue, a factor that gave attacking Mustangs a psychological edge. The enemy was aware of the threat but had little ability to evade. The Luftwaffe responded with increasingly sophisticated defensive measures, yet fundamental limitations could not be overcome. Anti-aircraft fire zones, known as flak alleys, became heavily fortified, with some approach corridors protected by over 100 guns of various calibers. Fighter cover was enhanced through the deployment of FW-190D and TA-152H aircraft, explicitly tasked with intercepting Allied fighters near jet bases. Jet pilots were instructed to vary their approach paths and altitude profiles to complicate interception, and some airfields installed smoke generators to obscure landing operations. Despite these countermeasures, the operational realities of the Me-262 could not be altered. Jet bases were limited in number, tied to specific fuel supplies, and aircraft endurance remained restricted. This allowed Allied fighters to concentrate around these fields, making encounters with jets increasingly likely. A striking example occurred on February 25, 1945, when the 55th Fighter Group executed a precise attack on Jielan-Kirchen airfield. P-51 arrived at the exact moment multiple Me-262 began their takeoff runs. In the ensuing engagement, 6 jets were destroyed on the ground or during takeoff, with several more sustaining damage. The losses represented a significant portion of the unit's operational strength. Historical records indicate that these Me-262 belonged to Kilogram 54, a bomber unit recently converted to jet operations, whose pilots lacked sufficient fighter training. The success of the 55th Fighter Group demonstrated that concentrated fighter sweeps against jets at known operating times could inflict severe damage, though the risk to the attacking Mustangs was substantial. Several were hit by defensive fire during the operation, and the overall success depended heavily on achieving complete surprise. The psychological effect on German pilots was cumulative, reinforcing the vulnerabilities of jet operations despite the advanced technology. 262 pilots were among the most skilled aviators in the Luftwaffe, selected with extreme care and trained extensively. Many were seasoned veterans, bringing significant combat experience to the new jet platform. They were acutely aware of the technological edge their aircraft provided, which initially instilled confidence in their ability to confront Allied formations. However, the recurring losses during takeoff and landing imposed a constant psychological burden. Pilots recognized that each mission's beginning and end carried severe risks. Enemy fighters could be waiting. There was no safe retreat once committed to a landing, and fuel constraints added another layer of stress. These pressures inevitably influenced both tactical decisions and overall performance in combat. The March 18, 1945, Allied raid on Berlin highlighted both the strengths and limitations of the 262. A massive force of 1,221 bombers, shielded by 632 escort fighters, struck the German capital in what became the final major air confrontation over Germany. In response, the Luftwaffe mobilized 37 262 jets from Jagdgeschwader 7 for a coordinated counterattack, the largest concentration of jets ever deployed in a single mission. Oberleutnant Guy Wegmann led his flight in a relatively loose formation toward the bomber stream, employing the Re-4M rockets operationally for the first time. These 50mm unguided rockets, mounted in underwing racks of 12 per aircraft, were engineered to detonate near bombers, causing destruction through blast and fragmentation without requiring precise targeting. Wegmann's salvo inflicted damage on a formation of B-17 seconds, and ground observers reported several bombers going down. Simultaneously, other 262 pilots attacked using their 30mm cannons, exploiting the jet's speed to make repeated passes before Allied escorts could effectively respond. The encounter, though brief, was intense. German pilots claimed to have destroyed 12 bombers and a single fighter. American records, however, confirmed the loss of 8 heavy bombers and 3 262 seconds in air combat. Such discrepancies reflected the common wartime tendency to overstate successes amid the confusion of battle. Even if the German claims were accepted at face value, the jets accounted for less than 1% of the attacking formation, which ultimately reached its targets and carried out its bombing objectives. From the Allied perspective, the operation was a complete success, despite 5 fighter pilots failing to return and numerous bomber crew casualties or captures. In February 1945, Adolf Galland, formerly Germany's general of fighters who had clashed with Hermann Göring over aerial strategy, established Jagdverband 44. This elite unit was composed exclusively of Germany's most experienced aces and placed under Galland's direct command. Its roster read like a catalogue of Luftwaffe legends, with pilots who collectively tallied hundreds of aerial victories. The squadron received preferential treatment in aircraft allocation, fuel supply, and logistical support, representing Germany's final serious effort to deploy jet fighters effectively. Galland himself participated in combat missions, recording successes with both conventional cannon fire and the R-4M rockets. Fellow pilots also reported successful interceptions of both bombers and occasionally their escorting fighters whenever jet tactics could be fully exploited. Nonetheless, Jagdverband 44's operational lifespan was measured in mere weeks. Constant Allied bombing forced frequent base relocations, fuel shortages grounded aircraft for extended periods, and mechanical issues, particularly engine reliability, left many jets non-operational while awaiting parts or repairs. Operational statistics for the 262 starkly illustrated the gap between its theoretical potential and practical impact. German records indicate that roughly 1,443 262 seconds were produced during the war, but only around 200,300 were ever deployed in combat. The rest were destroyed on the ground, lost during training, or rendered unusable due to maintenance problems. At no time did the Luftwaffe maintain more than 5,262 seconds in combat-ready condition, and daily operational availability typically hovered around 25 aircraft. These jets faced overwhelming opposition, with Allied fighter numbers exceeding 5,000 at any given moment, alongside thousands of bombers, a numerical disadvantage that could not be overcome by technological superiority alone. 262 pilots claimed approximately 542 Allied aircraft destroyed in aerial engagements. However, post-war verification revealed the expected pattern of wartime overclaiming, a phenomenon seen on all sides during the conflict. Despite the aircraft's impressive speed, firepower, and innovative rocket armament, the 262 ultimately could not alter the strategic trajectory of the war. Its brief operational history remains a testament to both the ingenuity and the limitations of late-war German aviation. Post-war assessments conducted by American analysts indicated that actual losses of the Messerschmitt Me 262 jets were significantly lower than wartime estimates had suggested. Nonetheless, Allied air forces consistently destroyed these jets at a pace that surpassed the Germans' ability to produce replacements or train new pilots. Records maintained by the United States credit P-51 Mustang units with a total of 92.5 confirmed Me 262 kills. This tally encompasses aircraft destroyed not only in air-to-air combat, but also on the ground and during takeoff or landing operations. Among American formations, the 357th Fighter Group, the unit of pilot Chuck Yeager, accounted for the largest share with 18.5 confirmed jet victories. The 55th Fighter Group reported 17 kills, while the 78th and 339th Fighter Groups each claimed 15 Me 262 seconds. British pilots contributed as well, particularly those flying Hawker Tempests and Supermarine Spitfires, recording roughly a dozen additional jet shootdowns. The cumulative impact of these operations gradually reduced the Me-262 force below replacement levels, causing its operational strength to diminish steadily despite ongoing production efforts until Germany's surrender. German jet aces offered mixed evaluations of the Me-262's effectiveness in post-war interviews. Peter Georg Yeager, who achieved 12 victories in the jet including 9 against P-51 seconds, acknowledged that its exceptional speed allowed safer interception of high-altitude bombers. However, he also noted that Allied counter-tactics increasingly undermined this advantage over time. Similarly, Walter Dahl, credited with 11 Me-262 victories, 6 of them P-51s, highlighted that severe fuel restrictions and engine reliability issues constrained tactical options, rendering the aircraft's Heinrich Bahr, who recorded 16 Me-262 kills as part of his 240 total career victories, bluntly observed that the jet arrived too late and in insufficient numbers to influence the air war meaningfully. Franz Schau, probably the type's most successful ace with 17 kills including 6 4-engine bombers and 10 P-51 seconds, was killed in action in April 1945. Prior to his death, he emphasized that the Me-262 was poorly suited to dogfighting with maneuverable Allied fighters because its high approach speed and wide turning radius limited its agility. The operational lessons gleaned from the Me-262 shaped post-war jet fighter development around the world. Captured aircraft were thoroughly examined by Allied engineers in the United States and Britain, confirming that while the airframe was fundamentally sound, the engines remained a major limiting factor. Subsequent designs, including the American Lockheed P-80 and Republic F-84, as well as the Soviet MiG-15, incorporated solutions to the shortcomings identified in the Me-262. These improvements included longer engine lifespan, faster throttle response, greater fuel efficiency, and stronger structural components directly addressing vulnerabilities exploited by Allied pilots during combat. American airmen who successfully engaged Me-262 seconds became highly regarded within the fighter community. Their combat reports were carefully studied by intelligence officers and used as training material for future pilots. Beyond high-profile figures such as Urban Drew and Chuck Yeager, numerous other pilots achieved jet kills by consistently applying tactics honed through experience. These aviators shared certain traits: exceptional visual acuity, precise marksmanship, aggressive decision-making, and a willingness to accept risks that more cautious pilots avoided. Missions targeting jet airfields often involved navigating intense flak, requiring a level of courage approaching recklessness. Yet pilots repeatedly undertook these sorties, understanding the strategic necessity of neutralizing the Me-262 threat. The human cost of these operations was significant for both sides. American pilots lost during assaults on jet bases frequently perished far from home, often in fiery crashes caused by flak damage, with some bodies never recovered. German Me-262 pilots, considered the elite of the Luftwaffe, were irreplaceable, and each death or capture represented hundreds of hours of intensive training, immense financial investment, and invaluable tactical experience. The extreme stress imposed by combat and logistical pressures contributed to operational errors, takeoff and landing accidents, and a decline in overall combat effectiveness even among veteran airmen. By early 1945, the support infrastructure for Me-262 operations was collapsing. Maintenance facilities, supply chains, and training programs all deteriorated under constant Allied pressure, further reducing the jet's operational impact. Despite the technological promise of the Me-262, these logistical, tactical, and human limitations prevented it from altering the overall trajectory of the air war. Its legacy, however, lived on through the lessons it provided, directly informing the design and deployment of the next generation of jet fighters worldwide. As Allied forces pressed deeper into German territory and strategic bombing campaigns intensified, the Luftwaffe faced an escalating shortage of specialized jet fuel. Refineries critical for producing high-octane fuel were increasingly destroyed or seized, making supply lines unreliable. Meanwhile, replacement engines, already constrained by limited production capacity, became unavailable as manufacturing facilities were bombed or captured. Spare parts for aircraft airframes and onboard systems vanished from the supply chain, further complicating maintenance. Skilled ground crews suffered casualties in bombing raids, and many were reassigned to infantry units as the German military grew desperate for manpower. Even airfields came under direct attack as the front advanced eastward, forcing jet units to operate from improvised locations. By April 1945, Me-262 squadrons were often based on small stretches of autobahn or makeshift strips, concealing aircraft in wooded areas, functioning with minimal logistics, and constantly threatened by enemy air raids. During the closing weeks of the war, Me-262 operations became increasingly fragmented. Units flew independently, lacking central coordination, and missions were largely opportunistic rather than part of organized strategies. Pilots undertook sorties only when fuel was available, frequently targeting targets of convenience instead of executing planned objectives. Some aviators opted to fly their jets to areas under Allied control to surrender rather than continuing in combat that had become strategically hopeless. Others embarked on missions fully aware that returning to base might be impossible due to fuel shortages or the loss of airfield control. A small number of pilots, including members of Jagdverband 44, continued flying until the final days of the conflict, scoring aerial victories even as Germany's military structure disintegrated entirely. Post-war assessments conducted by British and American aviation analysts concluded that the Me-262 was a groundbreaking achievement in aviation technology, yet it arrived too late to materially influence the outcome of the war. Even without delays caused by Hitler's insistence on developing bomber variants, even if engine reliability had been higher, and even if production had been expanded, the aircraft could not overcome Germany's fundamental strategic disadvantages. By 1944, the country faced critical shortages of fuel, a deficit of trained pilots, a lack of air superiority necessary for safe operations, and a severe numerical inferiority against Allied air forces. The performance advantages of the Me-262 could not compensate for these systemic problems. The operational history of the Me-262, particularly its encounters with the P-51 Mustang, left a lasting influence on aerial combat doctrine. Military instructors emphasize that cutting-edge technology alone does not guarantee success in combat. The principle of exploiting enemy weaknesses rather than confronting their strengths became a cornerstone of fighter pilot education. Commanders learned that even revolutionary aircraft could be vulnerable if tactics were poorly adapted. American pilots developed specific methods to counter the Me-262's speed advantage, including using altitude to gain momentum in dives, timing attacks during slower phases of enemy flight, and patrolling known operating zones to intercept jets. These lessons remained relevant for decades, guiding the deployment and engagement strategies of subsequent generations of high-performance aircraft. Memoirs and interviews from pilots of the era provide a vivid record of the tactical and psychological challenges of engaging the Me-262. Chuck Yeager, among others, emphasized that bringing down these jets required pilots to take extraordinary risks, make instantaneous decisions, and operate with incomplete or uncertain information. The Me-262's legacy extended beyond its immediate battlefield impact, shaping military planning, pilot training, and procurement strategies throughout the Cold War and into the modern era. Pilots who engaged the German jet fighters during World War II often recounted the intense pressure of lingering over enemy airfields, aware that Flak and Luftwaffe interceptors would respond the instant an attack commenced. Striking the target required precise timing to maximize dive speed at the crucial moment, and there was a deep sense of accomplishment in demonstrating that Allied fighters could overcome aircraft that initially appeared invincible. Urban Drew, after finally being recognized in 1983 for his wartime achievements, reflected on the decades of frustration caused by unverified victories that were denied for nearly 40 years. Yet he also emphasized that the strategic importance of their missions outweighed personal accolades, highlighting a commitment to duty above recognition. The technical analysis of the 262's performance directly informed the design of the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, the United States' first operational jet fighter, which entered service as World War II drew to a close. Captured 262 aircraft were examined in detail by American engineers who studied their engines, airframes, and systems to identify both innovations and shortcomings. Lessons from this research influenced the P-80's development. Engines were redesigned for longer life and quicker throttle response, addressing the 262's most significant vulnerabilities. Fuel efficiency was improved to extend operational range beyond the 650-mile maximum of the German jet. Landing gear was strengthened to reduce accidents during takeoff and landing, and cockpit visibility was enhanced to improve pilot awareness in critical phases of flight. Soviet engineers undertook a similar program, transporting captured 262 seconds in engines to research centers for intensive testing. Findings from this effort contributed to jet fighters such as the MiG-15 and Yak-15. Soviet designers also incorporated British jet engine technologies acquired through espionage and technology transfers, combining multiple sources of knowledge to accelerate the development of their early jet fleet. This widespread study of the 262 played a pivotal role in the post-war transition from piston-driven fighters to jets, a shift that reshaped air forces around the world within a decade. By the mid-1950s, propeller aircraft had become largely obsolete in frontline service, replaced almost entirely by jet-powered fighters. Examining the operational record of the 262 reveals a plane capable of striking tactical blows but incapable of delivering strategic success. Individual German pilots achieved notable kill counts, and in specific engagements, the aircraft's advanced capabilities were undeniable. However, its overall influence on the Allied air campaign remained marginal. Strategic bombing continued with little interruption, and Allied fighters retained air superiority while ground forces progressed into Germany under strong aerial support. The significant investment in 262 production, including scarce raw materials, manufacturing resources, and trained labor, might have been more effectively allocated to conventional fighters, which could have been produced in greater numbers and flown with existing fuel and pilot training infrastructure. The story of German pilots leveraging their technological edge until countered by skilled Allied Mustang pilots highlights a broader truth. Sophisticated machinery alone cannot overcome fundamental operational disadvantages. Germany's creation of the 262 represented a genuine technological breakthrough, promising tactical superiority that was ultimately insufficient to compensate for limitations in personnel, materials, fuel supply, and strategic positioning. Conversely, American and Allied forces, operating simpler aircraft but supported by vast industrial output, comprehensive training, reliable logistics, and sound tactical planning, overcame the German jets through persistence, coordination, and professional skill. In hindsight, the 262 remains one of aviation history's most compelling examples of potential unrealized. It foretold the jet age, showcasing innovations that would shape the next generation of aircraft, yet its arrival was too late to influence the outcome of the conflict. While it achieved impressive results in individual battles, its contribution was unable to alter the broader trajectory of the war. The jet's legacy, therefore, lies not in battlefield dominance but in its enduring influence on post-war aviation design and the global shift from piston to jet propulsion. American pilots who confronted the challenge posed by Germany's early jet aircraft secured their place in aviation history not because their planes were technologically superior, but through exceptional skill, disciplined tactics, and unwavering. Their achievements demonstrated that factors rooted in human capability training, doctrine, leadership, and sheer resolve can compensate for technological gaps when applied strategically. The transition from German air superiority to Allied control in encounters between the Me-262 jets and P-51 Mustangs unfolded rapidly, spanning less than a year. It began in October 1944 with the first successful Allied engagement against a Me-262 and culminated by May 1945 when the Luftwaffe ceased jet operations entirely. This transformation did not stem from a single decisive factor but emerged from the combined effect of exploiting vulnerabilities in the Me-262 program and maintaining constant pressure, preventing the Luftwaffe from conducting sustained jet missions. Every Me-262 intercepted during takeoff or landing represented a direct reduction in Germany's capacity to threaten Allied bombers. The loss of experienced pilots, whether killed or captured, eroded the Luftwaffe's operational knowledge and skill base. Moreover, every effective Allied strike against jet airfields forced German operations to fragment, reducing coordination and undermining efficiency. During the final months of Me-262 deployment, German aircrews increasingly operated under dire circumstances. Limited fuel supplies constrained flights to essential missions only. Mechanical failures grounded aircraft for extended periods, while Allied patrols turned every departure and return into a high-risk endeavor. The constant relocation of airbases disrupted both planning and morale. Yet, despite these challenges, a number of pilots continued to fly missions until the very end of the conflict, displaying remarkable professionalism and courage even in the face of inevitable defeat. They understood that victory was unattainable, but duty, honor, and the hope that their actions could still have an impact propelled them forward. The end of the Me-262's operational life did not occur in a climactic confrontation. Instead, it was marked by a gradual unraveling as Germany's military infrastructure collapsed in early May 1945. Jets were abandoned on airstrips hidden in forests to avoid capture, or deliberately destroyed by their crews to deny them to advancing Allied forces. A few were flown into Allied-controlled territory and surrendered, but most simply ceased operations as fuel shortages and maintenance challenges made flight impossible. The aircraft that had once been hailed as potential game-changers against Allied bomber formations ended the war scattered across Germany, silent evidence of the disparity between their technical promise and operational reality. In contrast, the Mustang pilots who had systematically engaged and neutralized the jet threat returned home as the European conflict drew to a close. Their success illustrated the enduring principle that tactical proficiency and disciplined execution can outweigh technological advantage, achieving results that raw innovation alone cannot guarantee.